The invisible spend. It's 8:40 on a Tuesday night. There's chicken thawed in the fridge, rice in the cabinet, and a stove that works fine. And yet the phone comes out, the app opens, and $12 in fees gets added to a meal that could have cost $4. Nobody's starving. Nobody's in a rush. The food at home just requires a few steps, and the food on the phone requires one tap. That gap between a few steps and one tap is where a huge amount of your money and your motivation quietly leaks out. It's not one bad decision. It's the same tiny decision made 100 different ways every week for years. There's a name for it. Call it the convenience trap. Look back at your bank statement and your screen time report side by side, and you'll notice something strange. Neither one has a single scary line item on it. There's no $500 splurge, no 1 month you'd point to and say, that's where it went wrong. It's $12 here, 45 minutes there, one tap after another, each one too small on its own to explain anything. That's exactly what makes it so hard to catch, and exactly why it's worth catching. Because a trap you can name is a trap you can actually do something about, and a trap that stays nameless just keeps quietly running in the background of your life. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, because it's not just in your food delivery habit. It's in your subscriptions, your shopping cart, your commute, even the way you spend your attention. This episode is about that trap, why it works on you specifically, and how the fix for your bank account turns out to be the exact same fix for your willpower. The rise of frictionless spending. Think about how many decision points used to exist between wanting something and having it. You had to get in a car, or at least put on shoes. You had to find your wallet, count out cash, maybe wait in a line. Every one of those steps was a tiny checkpoint, a moment where your brain got a chance to ask, do I actually want this? Compare that to now. Your card is already saved. Your address is already stored. One tap confirms the order, and the checkpoint is just gone. That's the whole business model behind one-click checkout, behind delivery apps, behind the entire buy now, pay later industry. Names like Klarna, Afterpay, Affirm sitting right at checkout, offering to split anything into 4 small payments so it feels even smaller than it is. This wasn't an accident of technology getting better. It was a deliberate design goal. Entire product teams are paid specifically to shave decision points out of a checkout flow, because every extra step between wanting and having is a step where a customer might change their mind, and a changed mind is lost revenue. Every field you don't have to fill in, every screen you don't have to click through, was removed on purpose, tested, measured, and kept because it made people buy more, not because it made people happier with what they bought. On one side of the ledger, you have the old way, effortful, slow, full of natural pauses. On the other side, you have the new way, frictionless, instant, engineered specifically to remove those pauses. And the industry data on this is consistent in direction, even if the exact numbers move year to year. Adoption of these installment tools has grown fastest among people under 35, which is to say, people exactly like you and me listening to this. That's not an accident either. Younger consumers grew up without the old checkpoints, so there was never a habit of pausing to unlearn in the first place. The frictionless version is simply the only version they've ever known. There's no memory of counting cash out of a wallet to compare it against. The contrast is the whole point. It's not that frictionless spending is evil and old-fashioned spending was virtuous. It's that friction was doing a job, quietly, in the background, and now that job has been removed almost everywhere at once. Which raises the real question. If removing a pause changes your behavior that much, what is that pause actually doing for your brain in the first place? That's where we need to go next. Why friction removal works on your brain, not your wallet. Here's the part that changes how you see this. Your brain didn't evolve to evaluate a $12 delivery fee against a distant, abstract savings goal. It evolved to weigh what's right in front of it right now, against something vague and later. Behavioral economists call this present bias, sometimes hyperbolic discounting, and the research trail here goes back decades, through people like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler. The finding, in plain language, is this. Humans consistently overvalue a small reward available immediately and undervalue a larger reward available later, even when they can do the math and know it's irrational. Put a reward one tap away, and the brain treats it almost like it's already happening. Put the cost of that reward a few weeks away, on a statement you won't look at closely, and the brain barely registers it as real. It's the same reason. Grocery shopping on an empty stomach fills your cart with things you don't need. The immediate signal drowns out the delayed one. Except now nearly every purchase in your life has been engineered to feel like shopping hungry, whether or not you actually are. Now, here's the contrast that matters most in this whole episode. That exact same mechanism runs whether the later cost is money or effort. Skipping a workout for the couch, scrolling instead of reading something that actually builds a skill, ordering out instead of cooking. These are not separate willpower failures with separate causes. They're the identical brain shortcut, just wearing different clothes. On one side, instant ease. On the other side, a delayed cost too fuzzy to feel. This is also why willpower has always felt so unreliable as a strategy. You're trying to use conscious effort to overrule a shortcut that fires before conscious effort even gets a vote, which is a losing fight if you fight it there, but a very winnable one if you change the environment the shortcut is reacting to instead. Once you understand that the money problem and the discipline problem are actually one problem wearing two outfits, the fix stops being two separate self-improvement projects and becomes one skill, practiced in two areas of your life. But before we get to fixing anything, we need to see exactly how much this shortcut is costing you, because most people underestimate it badly. The convenience tax, quantified. Let's stack it up. A delivery fee here, a tip there, a just this once, rideshare because it's raining, an upgrade to express shipping because waiting 4 extra days felt unbearable for a purchase you weren't even using yet. None of these, on their own, feels like a decision worth agonizing over. That's the design. Each one is small enough to clear your mental bar for not a big deal. But add them up over a month. And commonly cited estimates from cost of living researchers put this kind of stacked convenience spending at several $100s a month for a typical urban professional, worth checking the current figures for your own area and habits rather than taking any one number as gospel. But the direction is not in dispute. Stretch that same rough estimate across a full year instead of a month, and you're looking at a number that could cover a real vacation, a meaningful dent in debt, or several months of rent. Again, treat the exact figure as illustrative and worth checking against your own numbers, not as a fact to repeat. Here's the contrast worth sitting with. If you ask that same person to justify spending $400 in one lump sum on convenience, most of them would say no immediately. Framed as one decision, it fails the sniff test. Framed as 40 small decisions across a month, it sails through, because your brain never audits a dollar amount, it audits a feeling. And none of those 40 moments felt big enough to trigger scrutiny. Try the reverse experiment for a week. Before each small convenience purchase, say the running monthly total out loud, not to shame yourself, just to hear it. And notice how differently the same $12 feels once it's attached to a number instead of floating free. This is the quiet tax you're paying, not to a government, but to your own present bias, collected in small denominations so it never sets off the alarm a large withdrawal would. And it doesn't stop at delivery fees and rideshares. There's a second, sneakier version of this tax running in the background of your bank account right now, and most people can't even list what it's charging them for. Subscription creep. Ask most people to name every subscription they're paying for right now, off the top of their head. Consumer research on this most consistently traced back to annual subscription surveys from firms like C+R Research, finds that people underestimate their own monthly subscription spend by something in the ballpark of half, worth confirming the exact current figure. But even as a rough estimate, that's a strange thing to be wrong about by that much. You'd think your own money would be the one thing you tracked accurately. Here's the contrast that explains it. A one-time purchase requires an active decision every single time. You pull out a card, you type numbers, you consciously choose to spend again. A subscription requires an active decision exactly once, at sign-up, and then defaults to spending your money automatically, forever, until you make an active decision to stop. The friction of deciding to keep paying has been removed entirely and replaced with a friction of deciding to cancel, which turns out to be a much higher bar for most people to clear, because canceling means finding the app, finding the menu, sometimes talking to a retention specialist whose entire job is to make canceling harder, sometimes navigating 3 separate confirmation screens, each asking if you're really sure. Streaming services stack on streaming services, a cloud storage plan you upgraded once and forgot about, a fitness app you used for 3 weeks 2 years ago, a productivity tool the whole team switched off of, but somehow you're still paying for. Personally, none of them show up as one bill. They show up scattered across statement lines with names generic enough to skim right past half of them, billed through a store instead of the company itself, which means the name on your statement doesn't even match the service you'd recognize. So the subscription doesn't just remove friction from the purchase, it inverts it. Continuing costs you nothing in effort. Stopping costs you effort. Compare that to a magazine subscription decades ago that arrived and you had to actively renew, versus today where the renewal is invisible and the cancellation is the effortful part. That inversion is the entire business model. And subscriptions are just the visible layer of this. There's a version of frictionless spending that's even harder to see coming, because it doesn't show up as one clean recurring charge, it shows up as 4. The hidden debt spiral. Picture someone. We'll call her the same person you might see in the mirror, who has 0 credit card debt and is proud of it. She checks her one bank account regularly, sees a healthy balance, feels responsible. What she doesn't see in that one place is that she's got a phone case on a 4-payment plan through one app, new shoes on a 4-payment plan through a different app, a mattress topper through a 3rd, and concert tickets through a 4th, each one small, each one interest-free, each one sitting in a different app's dashboard that she'd have to open individually to add them all up. No single lender sees the full picture. No single statement shows the total. She's not a reckless spender in own mind, and by the old definition of debt, the one with a single number on a single statement, she'd be right. But add up those 4 installment plans, and she's carrying real, recurring debt obligations, just scattered across enough different places that the picture never coheres into one alarming number. And the moment one paycheck arrives a few days late, or one of those 4 apps quietly charges a missed payment fee because a card on file expired, the interest-free framing stops being the whole story. The risk was always there. It was just invisible until it wasn't. Ask her how much she owes across all 4 apps combined and watch how long the pause is before she even attempts an answer. That pause is the tell, not a character flaw, just the predictable result of a system built with no single place to look. Contrast that with old-style debt. One card, one statement, one number staring back at you every month. Impossible to ignore. Buy now, pay later fragments that same debt across multiple, invisible ledgers. So, the friction of confronting your total financial picture, the thing that used to force a reckoning, has been engineered away right along with the friction of the purchase itself. It's not that people using these tools are careless. It's that the tools were built specifically to prevent the moment of reckoning from ever arriving. And once you notice how this same trick works on your money, you start noticing it works on your time and your focus too. Convenience erodes more than money. Widen the lens for a second, because this trap isn't only draining your bank account, it's also draining the muscle you'd need to fix it. Take a 10-minute walk versus a 5-minute rideshare for the same short trip. Take deliberately reading something that stretches your thinking versus opening whichever app serves you the next frictionless scroll, algorithmically tuned to require zero decisions from you at all. Just keep watching. Take cooking a meal from ingredients you chose in a store versus groceries dropped at your door by an app that also learned to suggest the extra items you didn't plan on buying. In every one of these pairs, the pattern is identical to the spending pattern. Physical effort gets outsourced. Cognitive effort gets outsourced. And every time you let the easier option win by default, you're reinforcing the same ease-seeking reflex that also reaches for the delivery app instead of the fridge. Here's the contrast that ties the whole episode together. Picture two versions of the same week. Version 1. Every small friction gets automatically routed around. Ride instead of walk, feed instead of book, delivery instead of fridge, saved card instead of typed card number. Version 2. The exact same week, but a handful of those frictions get left in place on purpose. The person living version 2 doesn't necessarily save more money or read more pages in any single instance. But over months, the muscle that says, "Actually, let me choose this deliberately," gets exercised in version 2 and atrophies in version 1. That muscle is discipline. It's not a fixed personality trait some people have and others don't. It's a reflex that gets trained by how often you're asked to make a real choice versus how often the choice gets made for you by design. That's genuinely good news. If you've ever felt like you were simply born with less willpower than someone else, the difference was never the raw material. It was how many real choices your daily environment happened to be asking of you, which means the fix isn't a new app or a stricter budget spreadsheet. It's something almost embarrassingly simple, and it's been sitting there the whole time. Friction is a feature, not a bug. Here's the reframe worth sitting with. Friction isn't the annoying thing standing between you and a good life. Friction is a checkpoint for intention, and checkpoints are exactly what good decisions run through. Think about a cash envelope system from a generation ago, physically counting bills out of an envelope for groceries. Clunky, old-fashioned, and also nearly impossible to overspend on without noticing, because the friction of running out of physical cash in your hand was the built-in stop sign. Compare that to a tap of a card with no visible balance in front of you at all. One has a natural pause built into the mechanics. The other has none. Or think about a 24-hour rule. For any non-essential purchase over a certain amount, add it to the cart, close the tab, and only come back the next day if you still want it. That's not deprivation. That's manufactured friction standing in for the pause that used to exist naturally. And more often than you'd expect, the urge simply isn't there anymore by the next day, which tells you it was never really about the item in the first place. Or simply removing your saved payment method from an app so that checking out requires actually typing in 16 digits again, a small enough step that it barely counts as an obstacle, and yet it's often the entire difference between an impulse purchase happening and not happening. It sounds almost too small to matter. But remember, the entire industry of frictionless spending was built by removing exactly that kind of small step, because they know how much power it has. If removing it was worth billions of dollars to build, putting it back is worth just as much to you. And unlike the discipline you keep trying to summon from willpower alone at 8 p.m., on a tired Tuesday, a piece of manufactured friction doesn't get tired, doesn't negotiate, doesn't need to be in the mood. It just quietly sits there doing its job every single time. The people who figured this out aren't depriving themselves. They're doing something specific and repeatable, and it's worth looking at exactly what they do differently. The people who choose the harder path. There's a version of a person who meal preps on Sunday instead of defaulting to delivery apps on random weeknights. Not because cooking is some moral virtue, but because the decision has already been made once, deliberately, instead of being made 40 separate times under time pressure at 8 p.m. There's a version of a person who keeps their phone on a stripped-down mode in the evening. Grayscale screen app timers, specifically so that opening the feed requires a few extra taps and a moment of, do I actually want to do this? Instead of 0 taps and 0 moments. There's a version of a person who sets up a manual transfer to savings on payday, typing in the amount themselves every single time, instead of an invisible auto roundup that feels like painless bonus savings, but also never quite feels real enough to be proud of, and rarely amounts to much. There's even a version of a person who leaves their phone in another room during a walk or a meal. Not to perform some digital detox, but because the friction of getting up and walking back to check it is exactly enough friction to make "do I really need to check this right now?" a real question instead of a reflex. None of these people would describe themselves as having superhuman discipline. Ask them, and most would say the opposite, that they know exactly how easily they'd slide back if the friction disappeared, which is precisely why they built it in, rather than trusting willpower alone to hold the line. In every one of these cases, notice the contrast with the frictionless default. It's not that the harder path is harder for its own sake. It's that the harder path routes the decision back through a moment of conscious choice, on purpose, at a controlled point that you picked, instead of an uncontrolled point that convenience picked for you. This is the difference between friction as an obstacle and friction as a lever. A lever, you install yourself at the exact spot where you know your own weak moment tends to happen. And once you see it as a lever instead of a punishment, building your own version of it stops being complicated. There's actually a simple 3-step exercise you can run this week to find exactly where to put it. Build your own friction audit. Here's the practical piece, and it only takes 3 steps. Step 1. Pull up your last bank or card statement, or better, open the account and subscription section of your phone's settings alongside it, and list every recurring or repeated convenience purchase you can find. Delivery orders, rideshares, subscriptions, express shipping charges, whatever shows up more than once. Don't judge it yet, just list it. A plain list on a note app is enough. This isn't about building a perfect spreadsheet. Step 2, for each item on that list, ask yourself one specific question. Would I still do this if I had to type in my card number by hand every single time instead of tapping a saved button? That question is a stand-in for the friction that's been engineered out, and your gut reaction to it is usually more honest than any budget spreadsheet. Because a spreadsheet shows you what happened, this question shows you what you'd actually choose if the shortcut wasn't there. Step 3. Pick exactly one item from that list, just one, and reintroduce a deliberate friction around it this week. Delete the saved card for that one app. Unsubscribe from the one service you forgot you had. Add a 24-hour rule to the one category you overspend on impulsively. Notice the contrast in that instruction. Most advice tells you to overhaul everything at once, cut every subscription, ban every delivery order, and that kind of sweeping change rarely survives past a week because it fights your whole environment at the same time. One deliberate friction, chosen specifically, is small enough to actually stick, and sticking is the entire game, because friction that doesn't last doesn't compound. Worth doing this same 3-step pass again next month too, once as a diagnosis and once as a habit. Because new convenience creeps in the same quiet way it did the first time. A new app, a new free trial, a new saved card, and the list needs refreshing the same way a budget does. Which brings us to why this one small choice actually matters more than it looks like it does. The compounding case for friction. Here's the piece that turns a small habit into something worth taking seriously. Canceling 2 subscriptions you forgot about. Skipping one delivery order a week, these look like tiny, almost forgettable wins on their own. But money that gets reintroduced through friction doesn't just get spent slightly less. It tends to get redirected, even accidentally, towards something with a longer horizon, a savings account, an extra payment somewhere, a small investment, and an extra $50 a month, left alone and compounding over years, turns into a genuinely large number. Not because $50 is a lot, but because time is doing the heavy lifting once the money is given the chance to sit still instead of leaking out one tap at a time. Run the standard compounding math on that, using an ordinary long-term market assumption rather than anything guaranteed. And $50 a month over a decade grows into something several times larger than what was actually put in. Not through any clever trick, just through years of not leaking. Contrast the two paths here directly. Path 1. Convenience keeps quietly skimming $50 or $100 a month indefinitely. And it compounds too, just in reverse, as a growing gap between where your money could have been and where it actually is. Path 2. You reintroduce friction on even a couple of those leaks, and the same compounding math starts working for you instead of against you. It's the identical mathematical engine, running in opposite directions. And the only difference is which side of the friction line your money sits on. The same logic scales down to the discipline side too. One fewer scroll session doesn't feel like much on a Tuesday, but a year of slightly more deliberate evenings compounds into a noticeably different person, the same way a year of slightly fewer delivery orders compounds into a noticeably different bank balance. And the two curves, money and discipline, tend to rise together because they were always being driven by the same underlying habit of choosing on purpose. That's why the audit from the last chapter isn't really about saving $12 on one delivery order this week. It's about which direction you point the compounding machine that's already running in your life, whether you've noticed it or not. One audit this week, so picture that same Tuesday night again. Chicken thawed in the fridge, rice in the cabinet, phone sitting on the counter. This time, notice the moment before the tap. That's it. That's the whole opportunity, right there in that half second where the old friction used to live. You don't need to overhaul your entire financial life this week. And you don't need to swear off every convenience forever. That was never the point. Pick the one item from your list. Ask the one question, would you still do this? With the card number typed in by hand. Reintroduce the one friction, deliberately. Somewhere it'll actually get felt. Do that, and pay attention to two things at once. Not just the dollars that stop leaking, but the small, specific feeling of having chosen something on purpose instead of by default. That feeling is the willpower this whole episode has been about. And it turns out you don't have to build it from nothing. You just have to stop letting convenience take it from you, one tap at a time. If this pattern sounds familiar, it's worth running the audit alongside someone you trust. Sometimes just saying the number out loud to another person does more than any spreadsheet can. And if you've already got a friction you swear by, one that's saved you money or focus without you even trying, that's worth holding on to and maybe passing along to somebody else who's still stuck ordering delivery in front of a full fridge. Run the audit this week. See what you find.